you all know if you've ever encountered something inexplicable while driving? Well, today's story is a terrifying personal experience shared by a man we will call Steve about a curious, true incident while driving in the deep mountains of Japan in the early morning. He mentioned that he almost met his end because of a peculiar and sinister dog. The whole incident was quite bizarre. So everyone, get ready and let's begin today's story. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Steve said this happened in the early 2000s when he and some friends had planned a wilderness barbecue for the weekend. The location they chose turned out to be a remote, beautiful spot with a small lake and lush foliage, which was quite rare to find in Tokyo. Their friend Lisa took some photos with a digital camera and marked the location with GPS. When they showed it to the group, everyone was excited. However, some friends had last-minute overtime at their company, so they couldn't make it until late in the afternoon. Because they all worked at the same company, they had to wait for everyone to finish work. As a result, when they arrived at the spot, it was nearly 5 p.m., and there were no lights or fires in the wilderness, plus an abundance of mosquitoes. They had 3 cars in total, one driven by Lisa, one by the friends from the same company, and one by Steve. Access to the barbecue site was quite challenging. They had to navigate a narrow, unlit asphalt road from the main road, surrounded by dense trees that made it even narrower. After a long stretch on this road, they had to turn onto an even smaller dirt road, only wide enough for one car and very uneven, making for slow and cautious driving. Eventually, they reached the grassy area for the barbecue, where there were natural large stones to place things during the barbecue. After their arrival, they all agreed that the place was serene and peaceful. They started barbecuing, and there were no unusual events during that time. However, a female colleague jokingly said, "Barbecuing here won't attract any wild animals, right?" Everyone laughed. But after a while, a dog emerged from the woods. Since this was a remote area with hardly any people around, the dog appeared dirty and had a malevolent look, clearly lured by the smell of the barbecue. However, it didn't approach the group and simply watched from a distance for a while before running off. After a round of barbecuing, it was getting dark, and the mosquitoes became especially aggressive. At this moment, Lisa received a call, saying that someone else wanted to join and was not far away. They should arrive soon. So, everyone relaxed and continued eating and drinking. But the real horror was yet to begin. After the friend of Lisa arrived, it was completely dark, so they had to rely on the headlights of their cars. The group began packing up their equipment as they were worried about draining the car batteries, and the headlights couldn't be on for too long. However, when they turned off the car headlights, they realized how pitch black their surroundings were. The deafening sound of cicadas and various unknown insects kept crashing into them. The mosquito repellent they brought was of no use. The shadows of the trees around them were eerie, shaped by the moonlight into a grayish hue. The small lake in the wilderness appeared pitch black. Some of the female members of the group started to feel uneasy, so they decided to leave. As Steve didn't know the way, he followed Lisa's car, with Lisa's car full of 5 people who all lived close to each other. Since no one lived in the same direction as Steve, he was alone in his car, and he locked the doors. They set off, and for a while, Steve felt a bit more at ease. They drove on the bumpy dirt road for a long time, and it was especially challenging at night. By this time, it was around 10:40 p.m., and the road seemed to be filled with endless potholes. After enduring the bumpy ride, they eventually reached a narrow, unlit serpentine asphalt road. Steve felt relieved because, at least, there were no more bumps. However, this road was long, winding, and had bends that prevented Steve from seeing the taillights of Lisa's car when it turned around a curve. After driving with a growing sense of unease, Steve suddenly felt a chill down his spine. They had been on this road for quite a while, and it felt like he hadn't changed his distance from Lisa's car for a long time. Given the estimated length of this road when they arrived, it shouldn't have taken this long. It should have led them out by now, based on the current time. Steve felt something was amiss and stepped on the gas to get closer to the car in front. Strangely, despite the engine roaring, the distance to the front car didn't change. This odd situation left Steve perplexed and unnerved, sending goosebumps down his arm. At this point, Steve considered calling Lisa and their group, but he was worried about being ridiculed for being scared. So, he continued driving, enduring his rising fear. However, the situation took an even more terrifying turn. As mentioned earlier, Lisa's car had 5 people in it, and they were chatting and moving around. Initially, this reassured Steve, but suddenly, he noticed that the shadows in the front car had remained absolutely still for a long time. It was as if they had turned into stone sculptures, not behaving like 5 lively individuals in a car. Maybe they were tired and had fallen asleep, he thought. But even if they were asleep, they should move or change positions occasionally. Something was profoundly wrong. Steve's fear intensified as he realized he was alone in his car, and he finally decided to call Lisa. He dialed the number, and the phone call connected after 2 beeps. However, what he heard was an abrupt and piercing sound, like static or interference, similar to a radio struggling to find a station. It was an eerie noise to come from a cell phone. Steve hung up and called again, with the same result. He thought it might be a signal issue, but when he checked the signal bars on his phone, he saw it was full. He had been driving for so long that he should have reached a more populated area by now. But all he could see ahead was darkness, with trees lining both sides of the road. Unable to contact his friends via phone, Steve decided to send a text message. He pulled over, selected a pre-written message that said, "Please call me back as soon as possible," and sent it. However, as he raised his head from the phone, he was stunned. Lisa's car was still there, motionless and at the same distance as before, their taillights illuminated by Steve's car's headlights. It was as if time had frozen. The people inside the car remained in the exact same positions they were in before, completely still. Steve was on the verge of getting out of his car to knock on the window of Lisa's car to see what was happening. However, he was alone on this deserted, unlit road, with no signs of civilization nearby. He couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. And with all his years of watching horror movies, he couldn't bring himself to get out of the car. He was trapped, not knowing whether to continue driving or stay put. The car in front clearly had several people, but they remained frozen like that because it was just too quiet around. Steve raised his hand to turn on the radio, wanting to hear some human voices to calm himself a bit. However, when he turned on the radio, it unexpectedly emitted the same electrical noise as his phone did earlier, and it became increasingly jarring and terrifying. Steve quickly tried to change the station to the usual one he listened to, but no matter how he adjusted it, the car's audio system kept producing the same eerie electrical noise. With a bit more composure, Steve tried to figure out what was causing the noise. However, the more he listened, the more he felt a tingling sensation throughout his body. The sound grew more and more unbearable, faster and faster, as if someone was rapidly turning the tuning knob on the radio, starting slow, but suddenly accelerating to an unattainable speed. At this moment, Steve hurriedly turned off the radio and switched to a CD. His car was relatively new, and he occasionally played CDs, but this time, the car's screen displayed no disc, signifying there was no CD. This deeply unsettled Steve, and scenes from horror movies began to play in his mind. Steve started honking the horn, even though there was no one around in the dark, deep mountains. The horn was particularly loud, but the car in front remained motionless. Steve continued honking and flashing the high beams, but it had no effect. In desperation, he decided to cautiously accelerate again. He pressed the gas pedal, and the car moved forward. But Lisa's car maintained the same distance without making a sound, as if it had never stopped. Steve was getting increasingly anxious, occasionally glancing at the passenger seat and the back seats, fearing the presence of something frightening. He even dared not look at the rearview mirror inside the car. As per the plot of a horror movie, he might see something unexpected there. Steve began to worry about the safety of his friends. If the car in front was no longer his friend's car, then what had happened to them? Steve continued driving forward, trying to accelerate or slow down, but the car in front matched his speed and maintained the same distance. By this point, it was well past midnight. Steve tried to call his friends several times, but no matter whom he dialed, it was the same. Inside the car in front, the figures remained motionless, and no one picked up their phones. Steve's palms were sweating, and his feet felt numb. While adjusting his seating position, Steve suddenly found an angle where he could see the rear-view mirror in the car ahead. He quickly checked it, but couldn't see clearly because it was too far away. It should have been where Lisa's face should be, but there was only a black, foggy shape. He couldn't make out any details. At this moment, Steve had a chilling thought. The road was quite winding, and if he were to make a U-turn at some point, would the car in front follow suit? While contemplating this, a cold breeze suddenly blew in through the open sunroof, which was unusual because Steve always kept it closed. Realizing this, Steve detected the scent of barbecued meat in the air. He remembered that he had some leftover grilled meat and seafood in the back seat of the car. He struggled to pull the bag to the front and threw the food out of the sunroof, thinking it might be a kind of offering. After disposing of the food, he hurriedly closed the sunroof, wondering if something might have entered the car. The car in front had just turned a corner and was out of sight. Steve stopped the car and shifted into reverse. since there was only one brake light at the back, and it didn't provide much illumination. It was hard to see the road. Steve reversed quickly, but crashed into something after only a few meters. A horrifying screech accompanied the impact, and Steve was too terrified to discern what he had hit. In the darkness, Steve understood he had collided with something, but didn't dare to get out of the car in this situation. There was also the possibility that this was a trick to lure him out. Steve nervously turned the steering wheel slightly to the side and continued reversing to use the car's headlights to see what he had hit. However, as he reversed, Steve felt a chill. He suddenly realized that the car in front hadn't reversed along with him. He had now exceeded the distance he had maintained earlier, and the car in front had disappeared. The feeling of isolation became even stronger. Steve was truly alone now. When he finally reached the main road and saw Lisa's car parked with hazard lights on, Steve felt both relieved and fearful. He carefully approached, and his friends, seemingly relieved to see him, came out to ask, "Where were you? What took you so long? What happened to you? Why weren't you behind us? We couldn't reach you on the phone." Steve almost burst into tears and recounted his experience in detail. After understanding what had happened on his side, Lisa and the group of friends revealed their experiences. They had been in their car, chatting and laughing, not paying much attention to Steve's car, assuming it was following behind. But then, when Steve's car suddenly disappeared, they stopped their car, waited for about 15 minutes, and decided to go back, fearing something had happened. They tried to call Steve, but their calls were met with the strange electrical noise from the radio. They also mentioned receiving a strange blank message, and when they attempted to send a message back, Steve's number played the electrical noise. Lisa explained that the car's air conditioning had malfunctioned, so they had been driving with the windows down. They noticed a strong barbecue smell and even heard a dog barking along the way. Still, they didn't think much of it. After Steve asked, the group considered a few possibilities. The first was that they encountered an evil spirit, but the smell of barbecue scared it away. The second was that the dog they saw was some evil entity, and coincidental collision with the dog ended the hallucination. The third was that there might have been some kind of miasma in the mountains, causing hallucinations. The fourth was that the dog was benevolent, and it protected Steve after he threw the barbecue meat as an offering. In the end, Lisa insisted on driving Steve home, and the story concluded. The mysteries and uncertainties remain, and the interpretation of the events is left open to everyone's imagination and perspective. So what do you think happened to Steve that night? Please like and subscribe and let me know.